We are back, everybody. It's been a while since I've done a review. I've been pretty sick. Still pretty sick. My voice is a little sore, so forgive me for that. But being sick meant I had some time to read, so I read The Golden Age Submariner, Timely's Greatest, the pre-war years. So this is the Submariner from prior to it being Marvel, though the book was actually called Marvel Comixs instead of the company. And the company was Timely. And as you see, we have a large list of credits that go all the way from Marvel Comics up to 31. Submariner Comics, I believe, has 3 or 4 issues. Then you get some all-winter comics and a bunch of comics from Human Torch and a couple others. And then there's also at the end, Bill Everett did a character called the Finn, which was another like underwater themed superhero. It wasn't quite as popular and only lasted for 3 stories. Now all these stories are like 12 pages. There's one actually that's 60 in there, but for the most part they're 12-page comics. This volume had 2 different covers. This is like the classic cover, and there was also a different looking cover. But I like these classic that look like, you know, the patriotic theme and all that. I think it fits the era well, and I love the internal covers of the book. I mean, this is just really pretty to look at, and very happy to have. So, good little shelf collection. Was it a good read? It's a great question. And I would say it's hit and miss. I really enjoy the beginning, where Bill Everett establishes the origin of the Submariner, and he's out there. He's really this badass who's just going around, and he just kicks the crap out of humans. And you see all this weird underwater Atlantis. The colors are so cool, and it looks like a little bit of an acid trip here. But I enjoy it. And you get the origin. He meets this gal, Betty Dean, who he goes on a number of adventures with. Let me see what I want to show you a little something. But it starts out pretty fun. It's very interesting the way that these are structured and written, because they are. It feels like he just went with the flow, and there's not like a rigid structure like a storyline you would see today. It's like Submariner's origin. You kind of go over that. Then he's kind of just jumping around, and then he's kind of just in the United States doing his thing, and then he jumps away. And so very, very quick. You get a lot out of this. It was a lot of fun in that first issue, and it stays fun. The Submariner decides to attack the Earthling people, whatever you want to call us, at this point in the second issue, and he goes in, but he ends up kind of being a hero. He sort of saves the day a little bit. I want to show you a comparison. I'm trying to find, because there is a Golden Age Marvel Comics volume, which just has the first 12 issues of Marvel Comics, which these are pulled from, and the color, the restoration seems to be a little bit different, and I can't tell if this was that. Here we go. So we can actually show you side by side. Just looks slightly more cleaned up here. Just the colors are a little bit more vibrant in the new one, I would say, compared to the Marvel Comics volume. And the Marvel Comics, each one of these is like a 64-page issue, and there's 12-page comic installments. The Submariner is just one of those. The Human Torch is another. There's a character called Angel, who's a fairly boring superhero who I've read in the other one, and an old version of Kazar, and a bunch of other different characters that kind of rotate in and out of there. But this is pure Submariner, and it's all Bill Everett's art, so you get a very consistent read. There's a cool here's Namor's underwater fortress here. He's got his character Betty, who he's hanging out with. Now, as it goes along, he originally is fighting against the humans and ends up fighting the Human Torch at some point. I'm not sure if we're before this. Yeah, this will be just the place to make my headquarters. I love this. Like, of course, the Statue of Liberty where he makes his headquarters. That's a fun spot. He goes up to the top of the Empire State Building and just like chucks the top of it down or whatever. I mean, he's pretty mean through the course of this. And then they send the Human Torch after him. That's where this comes in. So the Human Torch is an android robot in this era, and it's not exactly the same as Johnny Storm. But they fight, and it ends up they go to a standstill of sorts. And this is really fun. It's actually really fun up through here about and very interesting stories while the Human Torch is fighting. Now the Submariner also kidnaps a couple of people. They're named Luther and Lynn. And Lynn is, I guess, Luther's girlfriend, but Submariner is intent on marrying her. Betty Dean kind of leaves the scene at this point, who's a policewoman who I thought was going to be the love interest first, but I guess this is it. And Namor doesn't even like Lynn, but he says his mom just like, who's a queen or whatever, like forces him to have to marry her. Like that's what she wants. So he always kidnaps this chick. And that's what we see here. And there's no rhyme or reason for it. I don't really see like a compelling, she's not that compelling of a character. But there's a while where they just deal with that. And then Namor starts fighting Nazis while he's got these people kidnapped. And that's interesting for a while. And what's cool about this is you get these little vignettes and covers and different advertisements in here too. So you get this like Marvel advertisement. It's very cool. Eventually the Submariner and the Torch fight side by side, as that advertisement said. And they end up fighting Nazis together. So they do their little superhero battle for 2 issues, and they come back and they're heroes together. Lots of war drama. It's very weird. Namor's got like this subterranean fleet that like can fly out of the water and just mess with all the Nazis and stuff like that. It's pretty fun. Namor's powers are all over the map, just depending on the issue. I mean, his power level, like, I mean, he can get hit by a dude and then be knocked out if he feels like it, and then he can take on like an entire like naval group by himself if he feels like it. So it just depends on the issue. Not very consistent on that level. That's okay. I mean, it doesn't matter. I enjoy the story with Luther and Lynn a little bit. I wish they would have developed a little more. I wish they would have developed Betty a little more. And here's the Submariner and the Human Torch working together, as mentioned. And then after this, what happens is it's fun for a bit, but then it ends up devolving into, I guess, the standard comic. And the standard comic for the Submariner is the Submariner finds and uncovers a Nazi plot, and then the Submariner beats up all the Nazis, and then the Submariner comes back and he calls the Coast Guard or the Navy or the police or whatever, and goes, here you are, round it up, take them. And then they go, oh, thank you so much. And he always goes, I need no thanks. I'm just happy to help Uncle Sam. So that's what it devolves into. And it becomes a lot less interesting during those comic periods, which is, I'd say, around page 3 or 400. You still got an interesting one here where Namor's boxing. And they become one-offs where just Namor does that. And it always ends up being a Nazi guy who's a bad guy. And it always ends up Namor doing that and just calling the local authorities to bring him in, and then saying he just wants to help out Uncle Sam or whatever. Now, I think that's the standard Marvel Comics one. Now, there are a couple different stories in here where like Namor decides to go bad at some point, and he decides to take over the world for himself, and that's actually a really fun issue. So when they deviate from the script a little bit and do something different, it ends up pretty fun. And towards the very, very end, you finally get Namor dealing with some superhuman threats. Like there was like a Frankenstein monster he kind of dealt with, which was very fun. This is where he join forces against the Submariner. He wants to rule the world. I love it. And that ended up being pretty fun. So once it gets into the supernatural threats at the end, it's like they kind of, I guess the war thing was played out a little bit, and it's pretty fun. But what's interesting is around that time when they switched to that theme, like Submariner just kind of travels around and does his thing. And he's like, I'm in Colorado today, so I'm going to help out these miners who, oh gosh, there's Nazis here. And it's like plot lines like that. And there's no real supporting cast. There's no real character development. It's just Namor reads something in the newspaper and decides to investigate and then does it. Now, it was brought to my attention that because of the way comics were at the time, there were no subscriptions. There were nothing like that. So a kid might pick up a comic and never pick up another comic. So you really just want to get in your 12 pages, get to the heart of what the Submariner story is, and that's why they did that. Here's one of them. Like he beat the bad guys, and he gets this treasure at the end, and this is kind of the typical ending. That's okay. You'll pay for it. I want a cut of the treasure, but make sure to cut my check to the USO. Goodbye now. And it always ends up with like goodbye now and things like that. It's very bizarre, but funny. But I still feel like it suffers, even though that was obviously a formulaic thing they were doing for the market at the time, because you want to just grab the thing from the spinner rack, and that's it. Here's the Frankenstein monster, as mentioned. He's a lot bigger than everybody else. It's a lot of fun. He's got artificial flesh they put on him. So this was a very fun issue. And I really think the issues where, you know, they experimented on different stuff like that were more interesting than the generic let's find Nazis issues. Cool. So it ended pretty good. I'd say the middle portion was a little tough to get through. The beginning was a lot of fun, and I was very interested in all of his like Atlantean culture and all that. And then the end, you know, picked up pretty good. So I'd be interested to see where this goes in the post-war era Submariner comics. And then at the end of it, so at the very end of it, United States goes to war with Japan, and suddenly he's not just fighting Nazis anymore. He's fighting Japs. And there we go. And this is some cool aerial battle stuff, but they just go into full like war comics sometime. It's actually pretty fun. It's kind of weird watching Submariner do that instead of fighting you know, some other superheroes. And here's the Finn. Now the concept of the Finn is he was like a naval officer in a submarine who the submarine was going down, and he kind of got some equipment and escaped, the only person who could escape, and he ended up in some weird cave with some weird creatures and things like that, and some weird waters that's fresh water under the sea. And it gave him some powers to be able to breathe under the sea, and he goes out and he kind of does his war fighting just like Submariner. So a little less compelling of a character. It's interesting that the Submariner with his Atlantean culture actually is way more interesting than just this naval officer. I did like the little undersea creatures he was fighting that were like birdfish things. Interesting. Yeah, they call it, here it is, Birdfish Man. I love that. So that was interesting. But the Finn obviously was not quite as good as the Submariner, and this is obvious. This is why it didn't last so long. And his last issue actually got put into a random book called Comedy Comics, and it's not even a comedy. So it's a very weird placement for that. So probably wasn't that popular, and that's probably why they abandoned it real quick. Plus, you don't really need another underwater superhero doing the exact same thing as Namor. Overall, I'm glad I read it. I think it was fun. Like I said, I like the very beginning ones, like the first few, a lot more, because I feel like they were a little more experimental, and they were trying to develop things and trying to find their way, which made for more interesting. Once they got into the formula, it was a bit hard to read. And then after that, once they kind of deviated from that again, those issues are pretty fun. So overall, it's all right. This does have a $150 price tag because they did all the restorations for all these comics. Like I said, this Marvel Comics over here just goes through Marvel Comics 1 through 12, but it does their full issues. This has Namor, in all winter comics and all the way up through 31. So I think they had to do a lot of restoration work to stuff that hasn't been collected before. And I think that Finn stuff also has not been collected before. It's fun going through the Golden Age regardless. What's interesting is the Fantastic Four, when the Submariner comes back, he's very much the same character. They talk about how he's been missing for years, and he's like just this random hobo who lost his memory in the Fantastic Four. And so the continuity is kind of there, and that makes for something pretty neat about this, which I don't think is the case with like the Human. I guess the Human Torch makes an appearance or two in standard Marvel, but it's definitely not the same. So fun stuff. I enjoy it. I like the Golden Age stuff, and I like the experimentation. I like the rough dialogue a little bit, and the just really not having it completely dialed in. It just feels a little more authentic, and it feels like there's a little more care put into the characters than a lot of the stuff nowadays, where it's like they are trying to keep a corporate brand. And so this is interesting stuff. I love Bill Everett's art, and I think the restoration job was great. You saw how bright all the colors are all the way throughout. It's just it feels like you're reading a new comic, even though it's an old one. It's pretty cool. So that's it. If you like this review, hit subscribe, hit the like button, and pick up the book. I will talk to you guys soon. See ya.